Lakeland PBS presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
My name is Brandon Ferdig. I'm a writer and a videographer, YouTuber, some people might say. I was born in Black Duck, Minnesota, and I grew up there for the first 18 years of my life, graduated high school there, and then I went to college in the Twin Cities. After that, I began to write, began a blog, began a cable access show where I interviewed people. Whether it's writing or interviewing, my content is most often about cultures, individual stories, really finding out what it's like to live in another person's shoes, what their experience is like, what life is like through their eyes. I remember I was in high school and a friend's grandmother and I were, for some reason, we were by ourselves. I think maybe my friend and I were visiting his grandmother and he was off, I don't know where. He may have been in another room. And her and I were just talking and I noticed the picture of her late husband. So when I thought about it for just right there on the spot, I saw her late husband's picture on the mantle or on the windowsill or whatever. I thought, gosh, you were together with him for a long time. Do you still miss him? Do you still talk to him? And that's when she teared up. And then she opened up to me and said, yes, I do. And it's difficult. You know, when we're young, we don't think about the plight of being old. Well, there were a couple of detours in my late teens, early 20s. I went to college for psychology, actually. It wasn't journalism like I initially thought it was going to be. What started to happen, though, was I started to travel. And that got me out of the Twin Cities and across the world. I lived on 2 different continents between the years 2010 and 2014. And that led to a book. About a year I lived in China and traveling around that country, feeling out the culture, interviewing people where I could, whether it was a disabled person on the street in China, in the city I was in, begging for money because they don't have welfare there. I interviewed a 99-year-old woman with the little bound feet that China used to do with all girls 100 years ago. They would bind the feet at about 5 years old so they would stop growing.
Oh, it's quite dark in here. There she is, though. This grandma. There's her little feet. You can see the arches are all bent upward like they used to do.
And she'd had those feet her whole life. And so I wanted to ask her about that process. And she was actually comfortable with me removing her sock and holding her little deformed foot. And so through a translator, I was able to interview her about the experience, about China over the last 100 years, rural China, you know, cities across the country. And then I came home and wrote a book about the experience. I remember, in fact, I was on a bus between the airport and the city I was going to live in. So we flew into Guangzhou, which is the largest city in the southern half of the country. It's not far from Hong Kong. And I lived in another city called Zhuhai, which no one here probably knows, but it's still a city of 1 million people. That's China. It's across the delta from Hong Kong. So it's all in that, it's called the Pearl River Delta, which is about the size of Connecticut, and it has about 60 million people. And I taught English down in Zhuhai. So while I was on the bus from the airport in Guangzhou down to Zhuhai, which is probably an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours, I remember hearing a mother teaching her daughter the numbers. And those were the first Chinese words, other than probably ni hao, which is hello, and xie xie, which is thank you, that I picked up. And then I would take classes because my school offered them to the English teachers. And I just tried to pick it up from, you know, being in the country, asking people how to say this and making a couple of friends. And by the end, I could speak some Chinese. I was proud of myself. So I would write frequently about that concept of how their culture in China would compare to ours in the United States. And it would come up frequently because I taught at a school. So what's education like there compared to how it is in the US? What's law enforcement like? You know, we've had a lot of protests in the US now, not so much when I left in 2010, but there I went to a protest. And I thought, wow, in China, the protest is going to be a crackdown. We're going to see some kneecaps being busted with some nightsticks or something. But the police were so cool. Like, they just sat there and they talked to the protesters. And that blew me away because I had this image of China as being
Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, just lockdown. I was able to compare the two countries, the two cultures, the East and the West, in many ways throughout my year. The most being at the end when I practiced martial arts, Tai Chi and Kung Fu, in the mountains of central China, where Tai Chi originated. And I practiced up there for 9 days, which doesn't, doesn't sound like a long time, but it's sort of like a boot camp. And so 9 days of that, it was kind of a long time, and it was intense because there was electricity, but I didn't really use it. And no one spoke English, and you're up at 5 a.m. to jog, and it's Tai Chi all day. And you have breaks, of course, but it's a long day. And you really begin to see how I began to feel and see how my brain, racing, wanting to like go on the internet, wanting to watch TV, wanting to eat something, just want to be stimulated to a fault, I would say, versus most of the students there were just very serene, more so, content. Throughout my time there, I was never good at this Tai Chi, and there would be some extensive choreography where beyond just this repetitive motion, there was like maybe 20 moves that they were having us choreograph. So we would go way down and we would like go up like this, and we might lift the leg, and everything had to be just so. And I remember trying to just figure it out perfectly, and I had a heck of a time with it. I always struggled, more so than the other students. And the other students, by the way, were from 10-year-old boys, there was a few teenagers, and there were a few that were in their 20s and 30s. But where I did come through to help was nearing the end. One of the last days I was there, the students went down into the valley. So remember, we had this road, and then we have this housing, and then we have this dirt platform where they would also practice, and then it went down into the valley. And when we went down there, students were down there to get firewood and sticks for the oven to make food. By the time I got down there, they had tied up all these small trees, all these small logs, and had used vines even to tie around them. There was a problem though, in that some of the branches from the logs were sticking out. And this was a narrow path down the valley. So had they have tried to carry this bundle of logs up this valley path, the branches might have hit trees on the way up. So they had to try to break off these branches, and one was short and stubby. And these kung fu trained men were trying to just break it off with their feet. I said, hold on, I can help you. And I saw a rock nearby. See, I thought of invention, and they were always focused on the purity of the action. Whether it was a punch, or one time we would shovel dirt, and they were doing some landscaping, which in hindsight, I'm not sure if it was even landscaping, or if it was just shoveling to shovel. Like, move the dirt over there, and then move the dirt over back where it started. It was about the action of shoveling, and I kept thinking, where's a wheelbarrow? Or where's a backhoe? Let's get this done faster. And they were criticizing and laughing at the way I was doing this because, I was using my back, I wasn't using my legs. And I wasn't thrusting the shovel in there. I was just sort of, just sort of throwing it in the dirt. And I wasn't doing it like an attack. I was just doing it casually. So it was about the method, not about the result. But I wanted the result of this branch to be broke off, these logs. So I saw this rock and I shoved it underneath the branch to create a lever. And then I just gave it a little kick and it broke off. And they were all very happy. Oh, so clever, Feng Xiang, which is my Chinese name. And they knew a little English, so they said, so clever. They always said that.
That's a great story.
On the same journey down to get firewood, they were also getting kindling for the fire. And this girl was grabbing it with her bare hands, and it was like pine needles, and she was getting like cut. And then I saw these two like rake-like tools, and I said, hold on. And so I grabbed these two rake tools and I picked up a huge bunch and I could put it in the bag. And she's like, oh, so clever. And I thought, well, we just use salad tongs, that's all, and you guys use chopsticks. But it seemed like, I don't know. I mean, I know it was just one small example, but to me it represented the difference between, or at least a difference between the East and the West. And they, at least this culture of the East, they have strengthened and exercised oneness, mindfulness, calmness, contentment, serenity. And we, at least for me, I go to invention. How can I get it done faster, quicker, better, stronger, whatever, cheaper, efficiency? That's good too. So I thought, wow, how good is it to have the best of both worlds here? And it was just a strong lesson in learning the strengths of other cultures to come together for a better whole. I got back from China in 2011, and I knew immediately that I wanted to live in another part of the world. I wanted that same experience. just to grow my insight and knowledge and wisdom about humanity. So I had an opportunity to go to East Africa. I had met several people from there in the previous recent months, and so I thought, okay, life is sort of pushing me in this direction. And I met a man in Minneapolis from Tanzania who had started a school in his home village, but they needed computers. So I said, I can help. And I did. I raised some money online, about $2,000. I was able to get a handful of laptops, and I went out there with those laptops. And the nonprofit that funds this school from America bought me a ticket. So I flew out there early part of 2014 with these laptops, and I would go to this village school and teach these students who were about ages 12 to 17, 12 to 16. It's secondary school there. I taught them how to use computers, about half of which have never used a computer before. So we're talking about how to turn on a computer, how to use a mouse, and then basic word processing is what I really focused on. That experience obviously was life-changing, yet it was just the vehicle, as teaching English was in China. To me, it was about being in East Africa and soaking it all in. And I would go to church there, very charismatic and theatrical church service where I saw 13 women on stage exorcising demons and spitting up, and just, it was crazy. What I think I'm able to do with my work is what I like to say is I like to go deeper than judgment. You know, we have our knee-jerk reactions when we see somebody or when we hear what they say in the news or whatever, but if we have a conversation with them, then we're beyond judgment. There are some issues that I'd like to tackle. That will come more carefully and periodically. The main driver are the stories of the people, sharing the voices of the individuals that don't get told. So my website is theperiphery.com. On my website is a link to my YouTube channel, which is also called The Periphery. And you'll find all my interviews, travel videos from China, Africa. My book, Life Learned Abroad, Lessons on Humanity from China, is also available on my website. But you can also just go to Amazon and type in Life Learned Abroad, and you'll find it there too. It has the paperback and the ebook. And one last bonus about the ebook, if you read it on a color screen like a tablet or even a laptop or smartphone, the pictures are color, and there are links to YouTube throughout the ebook which go to videos that correspond with the text. So when I'm writing about a fish market in China, you can click a YouTube video and watch scenes from the market where I was. Yeah, whenever I've lived abroad, the vehicle getting out there has always just been that. The vehicle. What I've wanted to live abroad for is to live abroad. And that basis, that foundation from which to better understand, obviously, that culture, and by comparison, my culture, and by triangulation, perhaps, my culture, their culture, humanity. Because if you understand humanity in this culture and that culture, now you've got 2 points of reference. And from that, you can better understand the continuum of humanity as a whole.
Thank you so much for watching. Join us again next time on Common Ground.